It started with something small, a hesitation, a pause that hadn't existed before. Jake was waiting in the cafe where they always met on Thursdays. The same table, the one by the window where sunlight spilled across the chipped wood, warming their coffee cups and casting long shadows. It had been 40 minutes. No message, no call, no Emily. He stared out the window at the gray drizzle frosting the glass, heart drumming a quiet, numb rhythm. When she finally appeared, breathless, smile already painted on, he saw it. That flicker, that brief, almost imperceptible flinch when she met his eyes. "Oh God, Jake, I'm so sorry," she said, sliding into the seat, brushing rain from her hair. "Work exploded. I completely forgot to text." He smiled. Of course, work. It always was lately. "It's okay," he said, because that's what he did. Jake always smoothed over the cracks, but the crack didn't go away. It splintered a little deeper. Jake had always loved how alive Emily was. She entered rooms like laughter, left trails of energy behind her like a comet. But lately, that energy had been dimming, or rather, redirecting, away from him. She still kissed him hello, but her eyes flicked to her phone. She still lay in his arms on the couch, but half her attention was somewhere else, scrolling, typing, replying. He noticed it most in the silences. The ones that used to feel warm and comfortable now felt hollow. She didn't ask how his day was anymore. She didn't laugh at his dumb puns. She didn't bring him late-night snacks during his game nights like she used to. Jake didn't say anything. Not yet. But the silence had weight, and it was beginning to crush him. The moment everything started to shift irrevocably came with a flick of his thumb. He hadn't been looking for it. He swore to himself he hadn't. It was just one of those nights where sleep wouldn't come, and his thumb scrolled out of habit. Instagram, Explore tab. A familiar face in an unfamiliar context. Emily, laughing. A red Solo cup in one hand, the other slung around someone Jake hadn't seen in over a year. Alex, her ex. The caption said nothing incriminating. Last night was wild, but Jake didn't need words. He stared at it for too long, every detail burning itself into his brain. The curve of her smile, the way she tilted her head toward Alex, the shimmer in her eyes that hadn't been there around him for weeks. She hadn't told him she was going out. She'd told him she was tired, maybe would turn in early. He'd sent her a goodnight text. She hadn't replied. He confronted her the next day, in the quiet, measured way Jake always approached conflict. Gentle, calm, controlled. But this time it didn't help. "You were at that party with Alex?" he asked, phone in hand, tone carefully even. Emily blinked at the photo, color draining just a shade. "It wasn't planned. I didn't know he'd be there." "But you didn't tell me you were going to a party at all." "I didn't think it mattered. We weren't doing anything that night." Jake took a breath, tried to press down the anger rising like bile. "It's not about the party. It's about you lying, or at least hiding things. You're different lately. Distant." Emily bristled. "So what? You're checking up on me now? Scrolling through my social media looking for evidence?" "I wasn't looking," he said, voice cracking. "It found me." She crossed her arms. "You're reading way too much into this. Just because I didn't report every move I made doesn't mean I'm cheating or whatever you're thinking." "I never said you were cheating," Jake said slowly. "But now I'm wondering why you felt the need to say that." Silence bloomed between them, sharp, heavy. Then Emily stood. "I'm not doing this right now," she muttered, and walked out. The first real argument had happened. The first time Jake had raised his voice. The first time Emily had left instead of stayed. And yet, neither of them called it a breakup. They still texted sporadically, still made plans, though they were more often canceled than kept, still performed the motions of a relationship in limbo. Jake couldn't let go. Not yet. Not without knowing. That's when he started noticing the pattern, how she laughed a little too brightly around others, how she'd show up at group dinners and barely touch his hand under the table, how her phone never left her hand, how she started locking it. He hated himself for noticing, hated himself even more when he checked her tagged photos late at night, dissecting every smile, every face in the background. Every time he almost confronted her again, he stopped himself. What would he say? What if it pushed her further away? So instead, he started collecting questions like splinters in his chest. What changed? When did it start? Why was he suddenly not enough? And perhaps the most terrifying one, was he ever? This was not the relationship they had fought for. Not the one they had promised to rebuild after that rough winter, after the job loss, after her dad's health scare. They'd weathered all of it, together. But this distance, this new, vague, untouchable chasm, felt like something neither of them knew how to name. And if you couldn't name the enemy, how could you fight it? Still, Jake wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. But Emily, she already looked like she had one foot out the door. The days after the argument stretched long and thin, like old chewing gum. Nothing sweet left, just tension holding on for the sake of habit. Jake waited. He gave her space. He thought maybe that's what she needed. But space became silence. Text messages went unread for hours. Sometimes a full day. She used to send him memes at midnight and good morning selfies at 8 a.m. Now nothing. A half-hearted sorry, been slammed with work, was all he got after pouring out a paragraph about how much he missed her. He wanted to believe her. God, he tried. But then he saw the pictures. Another post, another party. Emily dressed in that low-cut maroon top she used to save for their date nights, and standing beside her, again, was Alex. Same arm draped across her shoulder, same casual familiarity. She didn't even tag Jake anymore. Jake stared at the screen in disbelief, nausea rising. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just sat there on the floor of his apartment, legs numb, heart folded in on itself like origami paper too thin to hold another crease. He tried calling. No answer. Texted, "Can we talk?" Nothing. The next night she showed up. Not with warmth or apologies, but with distance in her eyes. The kind that didn't come from being tired or stressed. The kind that comes from already being halfway gone. Jake opened the door with too much hope. She barely hugged him. Just walked in, arms crossed, eyes flicking around his living room like it wasn't hers anymore. "We need to talk," she said, already avoiding his gaze. Jake's stomach dropped. He nodded, gestured toward the couch, but she stayed standing. "I think we should take a break." Just like that. He blinked. Break? Emily exhaled, as if she'd been holding it in for days. "Yeah, just some time to think. I feel like we've been off for a while, and I don't want us to keep hurting each other just because we're afraid to let go." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. "So, this isn't goodbye?" "It doesn't have to be. I just need to figure things out. You do too, maybe." But her voice was already resigned. Her stance, final. She didn't touch him, didn't reach for his hand. She was preparing for a clean exit, not a pause. "Is this about Alex?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Her expression tightened. "Number. This is about us." He nodded slowly. "But you're still seeing him. You're still hanging out. While ghosting me." "I'm not seeing him," she said too quickly. "We're just in the same friend group. It's not what you think." Jake stared at her. "You used to tell me everything. Now I find out about your life from strangers' stories." Emily winced. "It's not fair for you to monitor me like that." "I'm not monitoring Em. I'm trying to figure out where the hell my girlfriend went." And then there it was. That flicker again. The same one he'd seen the day she showed up late to the cafe. Only now it wasn't fear or guilt. It was detachment. She was already gone. Her body was here, standing in front of him. But her heart was elsewhere. Maybe with Alex, maybe not. But definitely not with Jake anymore. "I think we should take a break," she said again, softer this time. Jake didn't answer. What was there to say? No, wouldn't change anything. She had made up her mind. She left 20 minutes later. No kiss, no love you, not even a see you soon. Just silence. Again. That night, Jake didn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every recent moment, trying to find the point of no return. Was it when she started coming home late? Was it when he stopped asking about her day because he was afraid of the answers? Was it that last New Year's party when she looked like she was somewhere else all night? He kept thinking about how she used to call him her anchor, how she once told him, "You make me feel safe, like nothing bad can get to me." So, when did safe start to feel suffocating? Over the next week, Jake tried not to spiral. He told himself it was just a phase. People needed space. Maybe she'd come back, realize what they had. But the photos kept coming. Now she wasn't even trying to hide them. She was out more than ever. Bars, brunches, rooftop parties, and always with the same circle, the one that included Alex. Sometimes they stood a little too close. Sometimes they were across the room from each other, not interacting at all. But it didn't matter. She was there, and Jake wasn't. The worst part? No one asked about him anymore. Not in the tags, not in the comments. People had already begun to reframe her as single. He was becoming a footnote in his own relationship. His friends tried to comfort him. "She's just confused, man. Maybe she's acting out. People self-sabotage all the time. Give her time. If she loves you, she'll come back." But Jake didn't want to be the option she returned to once the thrill wore off. He didn't want to be the backup plan or the emotional safety net. He wanted to be chosen. And she wasn't choosing him. One night, 2 weeks after the break, he walked by a park near her apartment. Pure accident. Or maybe part of him hoped she'd be there. She was, sitting on a bench with Alex, their heads close, laughing. Her hand brushed his knee. Jake didn't say anything. He just turned and walked away. Because what do you do when the person you love doesn't cheat on you, but they don't love you anymore either? He didn't text her after that. He didn't check her socials. He didn't block her, didn't beg. He just let the silence settle. Because the truth was unavoidable now. The break wasn't a pause. It was a soft ending disguised as hope. The worst pain isn't loud. It's not thrown plates or shouted accusations or doors slammed off hinges. It's the silence after the echo fades. The part where nothing happens anymore. Jake stopped checking his phone compulsively. At first, it was an act of self-control, a mental promise made at midnight and broken by breakfast. But eventually, the need dulled. Not because it hurt less, but because the ache had turned into something colder, deeper. Resignation. He didn't block Emily. That would have felt too petty, too final. And he wasn't angry. At least not in the way his friends expected him to be. They asked him if he'd confronted her, demanded answers, told her off. He hadn't. What was the point? What did you say to someone who had already moved on, emotionally and physically, before you even realized you were standing still? The memory of seeing her in the park wouldn't leave him. Emily, cross-legged on the grass, her face turned toward Alex, eyes glowing in a way that made Jake's stomach twist. Not because she looked in love, but because she looked happy. And he hadn't seen that look directed at him in months. There was no awkwardness, no guilt. She laughed openly, touched Alex's arm casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like this was her new normal. Jake hadn't meant to stop. He'd just been walking past, earbuds in, lost in a podcast he hadn't been listening to. And then, there she was. A ghost in daylight. They hadn't seen him, and maybe that was for the best, because in that moment, a strange peace settled over him. Cold and heavy, but still, peace. He wasn't part of her life anymore, not even as an afterthought. At home, he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the cracked screen of his phone. Emily's name still sat at the top of his messages, but the thread was silent. Last message from her. Hope you're doing okay. Sent days ago. An echo of obligation, not affection. He didn't reply. He wouldn't. Jake finally understood something that had eluded him in the weeks of second-guessing, wondering, aching. She had already chosen. She just hadn't said it out loud. Maybe she hadn't even admitted it to herself. Maybe taking a break was her way of easing out of it, sparing herself guilt by not calling it what it was. But that didn't change the outcome. She was gone. For a while, Jake still caught himself imagining ways she might come back. A late-night message, a knock on his door, tears in her eyes, apologies tumbling out, saying she made a mistake, that she'd been scared, confused. But those fantasies started feeling more pathetic than comforting. Because even if she did come back, what would be left of him? He had spent weeks twisting himself into questions. Was I not enough? Did I miss the signs? Could I have fought harder? But now the only question that mattered was, why would I want to be someone's safety net? Jake didn't want to be the fallback, the dependable guy she ran to when the fireworks fizzled. He didn't want to be the one she remembered only when her new world began to crack. He had always loved her fully, but love didn't mean staying where he wasn't wanted. He deleted Instagram, not out of spite, but survival. Each picture was a slow cut. Emily sipping wine on rooftops, dancing in dimly lit bars, smiling with people he'd never met and didn't want to know. It wasn't just seeing her with Alex. It was seeing her without him. So completely. As if he'd never existed. In the beginning, he told himself she was just coping differently. Now, he understood. She wasn't coping. She was thriving. And while part of him wanted to resent that, a larger part just felt tired. Not from grief, but from pretending there was still something to hold on to. A week after seeing her in the park, Jake packed up the shoebox. It had sat in his closet for over a year, filled with ticket stubs, dried flowers, a silly photo booth strip from their first trip together. He held each item like a memory still breathing, but none of them held the warmth they used to. He didn't throw them out, just closed the box and placed it high on the shelf, where dust could bury it in time. Maybe one day it would feel like history instead of heartbreak. Emily didn't reach out again. Maybe she assumed the silence meant agreement. Maybe she didn't even notice. Jake didn't know. He didn't care. Because now, for the first time in months, he wasn't waiting. He wasn't refreshing her feed or rehearsing what he'd say if she called. He wasn't holding space in his heart for someone who'd already made room for someone else. He wasn't angry. He wasn't broken. He was just done. Not in bitterness, but in understanding. Sometimes love doesn't end with a bang. It dissolves. Slowly. Quietly. Until one day you wake up and realize the person you would have done anything for hasn't crossed your mind in hours. And that realization doesn't hurt anymore. It frees you. Spring came slowly that year, the kind of spring that didn't announce itself with blossoms or warm winds, but crept in quietly, melting the ice from beneath before anyone noticed. And that was how it happened for Jake, too. Not all at once. No epiphany in the middle of the night. No grand cinematic moment. Just small things. The first morning he woke up and didn't feel the heaviness in his chest. The first time he saw an old photo of her and didn't flinch. The first Friday he didn't instinctively reach for his phone, expecting a message that never came. Healing was never loud. It wasn't triumphant. It was quiet, slow, like sunlight creeping across the floor. 1 inch at a time, unnoticed until the whole room was filled with light. Jake started going on walks again. Not to clear his head or retrace memories, but because he simply liked the stillness. The rhythm of his shoes on pavement. The way leaves rustled overhead without needing an audience. He passed by the park again one day, the same park where he'd last seen Emily. The bench was empty this time, and for the first time, it didn't mean anything. She wasn't gone from his life. She just no longer belonged in it. That distinction changed everything. He thought about her sometimes, not in longing, but in reflection, like a book he'd once read and learned a lot from, but no longer needed to reread. She had taught him many things about love, compromise, even heartbreak. But maybe the most important thing she taught him was what it felt like to lose himself. And now, he was choosing not to do that anymore. Not for anyone. Friends noticed the difference first. "You seem lighter," one of them said over coffee. Jake smiled. "I think I am." They asked if he'd heard from her. He hadn't, and he didn't expect to. He wasn't checking anymore. Not her social media, not mutual friends' posts, not the little corners of his life where she used to echo. He had let go, fully. And in that letting go, he found something unexpected. Space. Not emptiness, but space. For other things. Other people. Himself. He picked up sketching again, something he hadn't done since college, started reading more, volunteered at a local shelter on weekends. They were little things, nothing flashy, but they were his, and they felt good. One night, several months later, Jake sat alone on his balcony. The city was quiet. A warm breeze drifted through the railing. He sipped tea, barefoot, wearing a worn hoodie. There was no urgency to his thoughts, no ache behind his ribs, just peace. He pulled out his phone, scrolled past old messages, not to linger, but to delete, one by one, not as a statement, not as closure, simply because he didn't need them anymore. That part of his life was over, and it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like making room. He didn't hate Emily. He didn't love her anymore either. He simply understood. She had been right in her own way. They had changed, outgrown what they once were. She just couldn't say it cleanly, and he, in his fear of loss, clung harder than he should have. But now, months later, all of that pain had run its course, not erased, but softened, worn smooth by time and distance and perspective. Jake no longer imagined her walking back into his life, not because he wouldn't forgive her, but because he had already moved past the point where it mattered. She was a chapter, a long one, a significant one, but not the last one. He looked up at the night sky. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't looking for signs. There was no need. He was already on his way. And somewhere out there, he knew there'd be more days, more stories, more moments. None of them haunted by what could have been, only guided by what could still come. He wasn't broken anymore. He was beginning. Time passed. Not rushed, not dramatic, but with the steady patience that true healing requires. Seasons changed. The pain that once wrapped itself around Jake's ribs like wire had loosened. Where there had been sharpness, now there was air. Breath. Space. Jake didn't mark the day when he finally stopped loving Emily. There was no anniversary for such a moment. It happened like most real things do, quietly in the background, beneath errands and emails and morning coffee. A gradual shift, like winter fading into spring without asking permission. He had changed, and not in the way heartbreak stories often end. There was no new partner, no grand career move, no Instagram post proving he had won the breakup. That wasn't the point. What mattered was this. He no longer defined himself by what he had lost. He had made peace with what happened, with the blurred edges of their ending, the lack of closure, the confusing half-truths and misread signals. Emily had moved on, and so had he, though their paths had looked different. Where she had leapt forward quickly, maybe to escape the discomfort, Jake had taken the longer road, the harder one, the one that forced him to sit in the discomfort, to ask himself questions no one else could answer. Was I truly happy with her, or just afraid to be without her? Who was I outside of us? What kind of love do I want moving forward? In the silence that followed their breakup, he'd started answering those questions. Slowly, he rebuilt himself, not into someone entirely new, but into someone more whole, more intentional. He didn't just fill the gaps Emily left behind. He learned how to stop depending on someone else to fill them at all. He started finding joy in smaller things again. Sunday mornings in quiet cafes, the weight of a new book in his hands, long runs that cleared his head, conversations with people who saw him not as a man mid-breakup, but simply as Jake. Every once in a while, someone would bring up Emily, through mutual friends or passing comments, and it no longer hit him like a punch to the chest. It barely stung at all, not because she was irrelevant, but because she no longer defined the frame of his world. One night, looking out at the city skyline from his apartment, Jake realized he had gone an entire day without thinking about her. He smiled, not in triumph, but in understanding. That was the win, not forgetting her, but remembering himself. And as the wind brushed past the window pane and the city hummed softly below, he didn't make any grand declarations. He didn't need to. His silence said it all. Jake had let go, and in doing so, he had come home, to himself.